Managing and troubleshooting hardware devices and drivers. Windows XP does an excellent job of installing and configuring newer hardware devices. But as you can imagine, things can go wrong. What are you going to do in this operating system to help and configure and troubleshoot new devices that you install, such as maybe a new network adapter, some type of USB device? What are you going to do to get them up and running? Well, that's going to be the main focus of this video. Windows XP supports a wide variety of hardware devices, and for the most part you just install the device, the computer finds it, and you're off and running. You can start using the device right away. Well, if you have older hardware that's not plug-and-play compliant, we can still force Windows XP to use our older hardware. Maybe we've got an older network adapter. We'll see how to do that. But most newer hardware has a USB or a universal serial bus connector to easily install and get that device up and running. But there are a couple of gotchas about USB that we're going to take a look at in this video. And then after we've installed some of our devices and talked about devices, we're going to learn how to manage those devices and troubleshoot them within Device Manager. And hardware devices can't play and can't run unless we have drivers. Well, starting with Windows 2000, we have the ability to lock down which type of drivers are we going to install. We're going to take a look at how we can have a more stable system with Microsoft Sign drivers. Then we're going to finish off our look at the support that Windows XP Professional provides for multiple CPUs. So let's start with installing a USB device. Both Windows XP Home and Windows XP Professional Editions are plug-and-play operating systems, but let's put the plug-and-play functionality to task here. I've got a little USB web camera that I'm going to take, and while the computer is running, I'm going to insert the USB connector into the computer. And USB devices are one of the devices that you can install while the computer is running. So I'm going to plug it in right now. And in a second, in the right hand corner of the screen, you'll see a little Add Hardware Wizard icon appearing. And in addition to that, a little balloon will appear as well, saying we found new hardware. The recording won't actually be able to capture that balloon, but a balloon has popped up of found new hardware, and it'll detect the hardware. It's going to go through the plug-and-play operation of detecting what device it is, assigning the driver for the device if it has a driver, assigning any of the resources that are needed, and then the device is up and ready, and you're good to go. So plug-and-play in Windows XP works very well if you have plug-and-play devices, the plug-and-play driver, and also to get all the features that plug-and-play has to offer, you need a computer that supports the ACPI BIOS or the Advanced Configuration Power Management Interface BIOS to get all the features that plug-and-play has to offer in Windows 2000 and also in Windows XP. Now, some additional plug-and-play devices that can be added or removed while the computer is running are FireWire devices, which is IEEE 1394. That's used for still cameras, digital still cameras, digital video camcorders, and PC card devices for laptops. So USB, FireWire, and PC card devices are all plug-and-play, but they can also be added or removed while Windows XP is actually running. Well, what about our older devices that Windows XP can automatically detect? How are we going to install those? Well, we can use the Add Hardware Wizard, which used to be called in Windows 2000 the Add Remove Hardware Wizard. So let's take a look at how we use this wizard to get old stuff installed. In order to add new hardware and to update drivers for hardware, you have to be logged on as an administrator. We're logged on as an administrator here, so the next thing we have to do is go to our control panel. We do that by clicking on Start, Control Panel, and from here we're going to click on the link that says Printers and Other Hardware, and then in the left hand side underneath the See Also task column, you're going to choose Add Hardware. Here's a little tip for you too. If you want to get back to the normal type of control panel, we can click on Switch to Classic View, and that will present all of our control panels all in one page here. So from here we can choose the Add Hardware Wizard, And if Windows XP did not detect your plug-and-play device, this is one of the options that you can use to kind of force it to find that device. But before you use this, you might actually want to just shut down the computer, take out the device, maybe it's a PCI network card, and try putting it in a different slot and bring the computer back up and see if on that second time around Windows XP was able to find it. Maybe on the first time around it just wasn't able to load the driver for that network card for some reason. So if on that second time it didn't find that device, we can use the Add Hardware Wizard to kind of give Windows XP a swift boot in the pants, if you will, to find that device. And we can do this in one of two ways. We can have the wizard help us automatically find the device, or we can manually point it to the type of device that we want. So it's saying, have you already installed the device? Yes, we have. Thank you very much. Click on Next. Now, what type of device is it that you should install? Is it listed here? Well, if it didn't find the device, then you're going to scroll all the way down to the bottom and choose Add New Hardware Device, and then click on Next. And then it's asking you, hey, do you want to search for this hardware automatically? Do you want to compare this against the list of all the drivers that we know about? Well, Windows XP didn't do a good job of trying to find it automatically the first time, so I don't think you're going to do a good job the second time. So we're going to say, no, thanks. We're going to tell you what you're supposed to choose by manually selecting from a list of devices what you should install. So we can choose from the short list here and say, for example, maybe it's our network adapter that it wasn't able to find, or we could click on Show All the Devices, and in this example just see exactly what Windows XP supports. And once it finishes up here, it'll display a listing of all the manufacturers that Windows XP supports and the applicable devices and the drivers that were related to those devices as well. So this will appear in just a second here. And Windows XP supports thousands of devices right out of the can. It supports well over 5,000 different devices such as network cards, video cards, printers, scanners, etc., etc. So we've got some generic devices on the left-hand side here, generic drivers for modem, infrared, etc. And then if we scroll down here, we see specific manufacturers. So maybe we have a printer by Brother, or something to that effect. Or if the driver is not on the list here, we can either supply a floppy disk or a CD-ROM by clicking on Have Disk, insert the floppy disk or the CD-ROM. That will then be added to the list in the Add Hardware Wizard, and then you can choose from that manufacturer that was on the CD or the floppy disk and start the installation process that way. Now all these drivers on the right hand side have a little green check mark. That means that these drivers have a Microsoft digital signature. That's what this is referring to down here. We're going to talk about that in a second, but essentially means that these are good drivers and Microsoft likes these drivers. But we'll get back to that point in just a second here. So once you've gone through and either found the driver that you wanted or you've manually supplied the driver using the Have Disk, Windows XP will find that device, assign the driver, assign the resources, and that way you'll be able to finally use the device. So you can use this for plug-and-play devices that Windows XP just wasn't able to find for some reason, or if you have older devices such as an ISA old network card or an old ISA sound card, where you have to manually tell Windows XP that you have a non-plug-and-play compliant device and I want to help you to find it, or I'm going to provide you the drivers for that old device. In both those situations, the Add Hardware Wizard will be an excellent tool to help us to get those devices up and running. A lot of new devices these days use the Universal Serial Bus connector, which allows for plug-and-play installation of those type of devices. Windows XP provides support for USB 1.1 right out of the box, which allows for 12 megabits per second data transfer rates, and it also allows you to daisy chain up to 127 USB devices through a series of self-powered or bus-powered hubs. A self-powered hub has its own external power supply, and it can provide up to 500 milliamps of power to each USB port, whereas a bus-powered hub is a hub that's plugged into another USB port and can only provide up to 100 milliamps of power to each of those USB ports. Now, the sticky thing is what type of devices you're connecting to the ports. If you're using a USB keyboard, it only requires 100 milliamps of power. However, if you take a USB external hard drive, it requires 500 milliamps. So if you try to connect an external hard drive into the bus-powered hub, the hub can't provide enough power and it closes down the port, and you can't use that device. So you'd have to connect it into a self-powered hub. We can see how much power a USB device is drawing from the USB hub by using the device manager, and there's a couple ways to open up the device manager. First method is to click on Start, choose My Computer, right-click My Computer, then choose Properties, and then from here click on the Hardware tab, and then we have the option for the device manager. The other method to get to the device manager is also to click on Start, select My Computer, right-click My Computer, and then choose Manage. And that will open up the Computer Management Console, which also includes the Device Manager. The Device Manager in Windows XP is very similar to Device Manager in previous Windows operating systems. One new device that's listed is processors, so you find that in Windows XP. Let's scoot down and take a look at our USB devices. So at the very bottom it lists our USB controller card that's built into this particular computer. If we expand that, we see the USB root hub, which displays the number of ports that I have, and also how much power is being assigned to each port, and we can view that information by selecting USB root hub, right click, and then choose Properties. And then from here we click on the Power tab, which tells us that this hub is a self-powered hub and it's sending 500 milliamps to each port. And we have two ports, and we have a USB mouse connected to one port that's using 140 milliamps, and then we have an external a USB scanner that has its own power supply, so it's not drawing any power. Now, if for some reason you're not able to connect a USB device to your computer that you know supports USB, 9 times out of 10 the BIOS of the computer won't have been enabled to support your USB controller card. So if you go into Device Manager and you see an error icon next to your USB serial bus controller card, or this doesn't even appear, restart the computer, enter the BIOS of the computer, and look for an option that says Assign IRQ to USB or Assign IRQ to USB controller. We'll talk more about what an IRQ is in a moment here, but your USB controller card needs its own designated IRQ resource, but the actual USB devices don't use an IRQ. Let's see how we can use the Device Manager to manage other hardware devices, such as our network adapter. Just expand network adapters to see the network adapter or adapters you might have. And then to view the properties of the adapter, select it, right click, and from here we've got a little context menu that we can choose properties for the adapter, but we also have the ability to update the driver. So for example, if we have downloaded an updated driver from the web, or if we have an updated driver on a CD or floppy disk, we can use this method to update the driver. We can also temporarily disable the device by simply choosing disable, and that will prevent this device from working. It stops the actual driver. And if we want to remove the hardware and its associated device driver, we're going to choose uninstall. Kind of, sort of, maybe. You remember when we just looked at the Add Hardware Wizard? Well, in Windows 2000 that used to be called the Add and Remove Hardware Wizard, where if you no longer wanted to use a hardware device, you'd use the Add Remove Hardware Wizard to remove the hardware, and that would take out its associated driver. Well, now Windows XP has changed a little bit. To remove hardware, you remove the hardware, meaning you just open up the computer, physically take out the device from the slot, but that doesn't automatically remove the associated driver. To remove the driver that was being used by the hardware, choose uninstall. And scan for hardware changes allows us to force the plug and play process. Have we plugged something in but plug and play didn't kick in? And last but not least, properties. So the first tab, general tab, pretty straightforward, gives us basic information about the adapter. The advanced tab gives us specific information about the adapter. And the driver tab allows us to also update the driver and allows us to see who wrote the driver, where the driver is located, the file name for the driver, and the file version number. So if you want to make sure that you're installing a current updated driver, you can compare the version numbers. And the other two options we'll look at in our troubleshooting video. And the resources tab is pretty important. The resources tab displays all the unique settings that Windows XP has assigned to a particular device to allow that device to communicate with other hardware on the computer. For example, the IRQ setting allows the network card in this example to communicate with the CPU on the computer. Lastly, we can use the Power Management tab to tell Windows XP to place our devices into a low power state. And optionally, if our computer is in a standby mode, we can have the device bring the Windows XP out of the standby mode if any activity is going to the device. For example, if you have a modem configured to the computer and it's trying to accept a call, it'll come out of standby mode to accept that call. Let's close out of here and look at some of the other options in Device Manager. The Device Manager is displaying quite a bit of information, but it's not displaying every single last minutia of information. If we go up to the menu bar and choose View, if you notice there's an option here that says Show Hidden Devices. And as a default, the Device Manager will hide non-plug-and-play devices, printers, and previously connected devices. And that's a key thing right there. When I selected Show Hidden Devices, if you notice what happened to my network adapters, all of a sudden it's displaying a ton of adapters. Well, it's displaying adapters that I had previously installed into this system. And that's where this view can really help you in a bind. I've seen situations where you've removed the hardware and you try to install a similar type of device. So you remove a network card, you install another type of network card, but even though you remove the original one, the new one is just banging up against the old one because the original drivers are installed for that. So you can choose the View Hidden Devices, find that device, right-click on it, and uninstall. So it's displaying my old 3Com, my old Netgear, my old Realtek network card in here, but I only have one network card. It's just this one, and information related to my modem as well. And so we've got information about our non-plug-and-play drivers and information about printers, etc. Also, we have different options for displaying all these devices. We can display by connection. We can also display by our resources as well. If we want to cut to the chase and see where we could have a resource conflict, we could display by IRQ. And if you notice in this example, I have some sharing between this device. It's sharing the IRQ number 10 with my video card and my network card, and that is supported for PCI devices, and in this instance that is working fine, no problems there. So we have several different views for showing all of our devices. Let's go back to our original view. And the Device Manager is pretty straightforward, but it's an often neglected tool. This is a great tool to help you get your devices up and running, to troubleshoot them, and to get back to work. Now, your devices are only as reliable as the drivers that are associated with those devices. And that's half the battle, really. If you have a flaky driver that wasn't written very well and it tries to do things that it shouldn't do underneath the hood with the operating system, that can cause the blue screen of death or just weird behavior where the system hangs and freezes. So half the battle in troubleshooting the hardware is also making sure you have the right software, and the software is our drivers. So in that regard, Microsoft has created a method to ensure that you have good, reliable device drivers, and that method is called driver signing. And we can take a look at this by going to our Start menu, choose My Computer, right-click My Computer, and then choose Properties. And from here, we're going to click on our Hardware tab. And starting with Windows 2000, Microsoft had implemented a method to help you gauge whether or not you want to install drivers based on a digital signature, and that's called driver signing. And let's take a look at the driver signing options by clicking on the button. And the options that we have here are: do you want to install a driver based on whether or not it has a Microsoft digital signature? And that Microsoft digital signature means that the driver has passed some Microsoft compatibility test, and it indicates that the driver is an original file, it's unaltered, and that Microsoft has given it its seal of approval to work with Windows XP. And the main benefit of all this testing, the seal of approval, is that you should have a much more compatible system if you use all Microsoft digitally signed drivers. So to help us protect our system and to help us keep our system stable, what we can do is prevent drivers that don't have a Microsoft digital signature from being installed. So just outright say, no, you cannot be installed. That option is typically used on servers that have to be up and running 24/7, and you don't want to install some type of driver that hasn't been field tested to bring that server down. But the default option on our workstations on XP Professional is to just warn me, give me the opportunity to decide whether or not I want to install a driver that doesn't have a digital signature, or just blow it all off and say, forget it, ignore, it's going to be fine, there's nothing wrong with it. Well, just because a driver doesn't have a Microsoft digital signature doesn't mean it's going to wreck your system. But it's certainly good to have that seal of approval though. So the default is warned, let me know, or you can just completely block and say, no, I need a safe, secure, stable system. So let's leave that at the default setting. And we can also check which drivers do have a Microsoft digital signature by using a couple of different tools. And there's some new tools available on Windows XP that allows you to check which drivers have a signature, the date of the signature, and which drivers don't have a signature. Let's take a look at some of those tools now. Microsoft has included a really slick tool called the System Information Tool that allow you to display lots of information about your drivers and all the devices you have and the software that's installed in your machine. And to open this tool, we can click on Start and then choose All Programs, choose Accessories, and then choose System Tools. And within System Tools, select System Information. And the System Information tool allows you to do an audit of your system, of just general information, how much RAM you have, etc., etc. But it also allows you to view all the devices that you have in your system. For example, if you want to see if there are conflicts, which RQs are being assigned, if you want to see the individual components, and also if we want to see drivers that have a Microsoft digital signature, we can choose Software Environment, and we have this option here that says Signed Drivers. And that's going to display a subset of the signed drivers. It's not a complete listing, but we'll also be able to use this option, Software Environment, to see any print jobs, network connections. So we have one-stop shopping to see a lot of information that's happening underneath the hood on our machine. Now on the right-hand pane, we can see which drivers have a Microsoft digital signature. So there's quite a few. The version date, the actual type, and the manufacturer, the actual name of the file. And if we scroll back over to the left here, we just keep going down here. So there's a fair amount of drivers here, but it's not a definitive list. This tool has some tools within it. If we go up to the menu bar and choose Tools, we have another tool that allows us to see a definitive list of all the drivers that have a a digital signature, and that tool is called the File Signature Verification tool. So let's fire that puppy up by clicking on it, and then click on Start. And it's just going to go through and scan and see which drivers have the digital signature or got that nice OK there. Building a little log file that we can take a look at once it's finished building its list. And this is a good tool to perform a baseline of activity of how your machine looked when it was running well. What type of drivers were in your machine and installed prior to the problem occurring. So after you've set up and configured a machine and it's running and you've got all the devices in it and everything's there, use these tools to get a baseline of activity showing you how the machine looked like when it was running well. And we'll let it do its trick here. We're going to pause the video for just 1 sec. Oh, it came back up. So it's scanning all of our files here. It's going to take a little bit of time, so let me pause the video and we'll come back once it's finished. So it's finished its scan, and it's automatically displayed this dialog box once it's finished the scan, showing me all the files that have not been digitally signed. If we want to see the files that have been digitally signed, we click on the Close button, click on the Advanced button, and then go to the Logging tab, and from here we can display this log file called SIGVerf by clicking on View Log. And let's just expand this here. And that will show us all the drivers, and in this case we have 3,089 drivers, and out of those 3,089, 2,130 have a digital signature. So this is truly the definitive list. Great list once again to perform that baseline audit against, and for those critical machines, maybe for the engineers and CAD operators, those machines, they have to be running all the time. Now, this isn't the only tool that the system information has underneath the hood here. Another tool that can be used to look at drivers is the DirectX diagnostic tool. This tool is used to display more information about multimedia device drivers, such as your video cards and sound cards. And it's also used to perform DirectX tests. And DirectX is a key component for running the 3D applications, for maybe 3D games, and for providing really robust sound support. So the first page is pretty straightforward, just providing generic information about the system. And the DirectX tab is providing information about all the files and drivers related to DirectX in the system. The Display tab displays information about our video card that's installed in the system, allows us to potentially disable some of the functionality, test some functionality. And the Sound tab displays some information about the sound card that's installed in the machine, allows us to perform some tests. And the Music tab displays a little more information about the sound card as well, and some of the software that's included with the sound card. And the Input tab displays information about any human interface devices, and that's your keyboard, that's your mouse, that's a writing tablet, some type of trackpad, that type of thing. And then the Network tab displays information about performing tests for online games and for chatting type network connectivity. And the More Help tab is pretty straightforward. It provides some troubleshooters for DirectX and provides more help and additional information. And there you be. So we've got a nice tool here for gleaning a little more information about our multimedia device drivers. So as you see, Windows XP includes several tools to allow you to manage your devices and display information about your devices. But what if you have a computer that supports multiple CPUs? What type of application or what type of tool are you going to use to manage the hardware configuration for multiple CPUs? Well, that process has gotten a lot easier in Windows XP. Windows XP Professional supports 2 CPUs, whereas the Home Edition only supports a single CPU. In contrast, Windows 2000 also supported 2 CPUs, but is a little more manually intensive to provide that support. If, for example, in Windows 2000 you install Windows 2000 on a machine that has a single CPU, Then after the installation, you install the second CPU. At that point, you would have to go through a manual process to tell Windows 2000 about the single CPU, and you would do that by going into Device Manager, select the computer node, and in Windows 2000 you choose ACPI, and you'd right click and you choose Update Driver, and you would go through a manual process of updating the hardware abstraction layer to provide multiple CPU support. Well, in Windows XP, that's all a thing in the past. In Windows XP, to allow the computer to recognize and use that second CPU, you turn the machine off, you put the second CPU in, you turn it on, and that's it. That's all you have to do. The operating system automatically detects the second CPU and automatically assigns the resources and changes the hardware abstraction layer for multiple CPU configuration. So they've made that process of managing a multiple CPU machine in Windows XP very, very hands-free and very easy. So we've covered a lot of steps in this video for managing and configuring our hardware devices. So we've seen how Windows XP quite seamlessly installs new hardware in the background without any user intervention using plug and play. And we've also seen that if Windows XP isn't able to detect the hardware, if we have non-plug and play compliant hardware, that we can use the Add Hardware Wizard to get those devices up and running. And a lot of devices use the USB interface to connect to the computer and to transfer the data. And we learned some of the gotchas of USB, that we have to make sure the controller is enabled in the BIOS, and we have to make sure that we're using the right type of USB hub to provide the power support for the USB devices. And then we learned how to manage the devices and troubleshoot the devices and update the devices within the Device Manager. And our devices are only as strong and as stable as our drivers. We can provide a stable system by ensuring that only Microsoft digitally signed drivers are associated with our devices. And then we learned that Windows XP provides completely hands-free support for installing a second CPU. It's just auto magic. So I hope this video has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.